Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Avatar in review video. This one's going to be episode 5 for The Legend of Korra Book 1 Air, first book of The Legend of Korra. So yeah, we're on to Legend of Korra now. I'm obviously going to do the 4 books, then Korra overall, and then finally, Korra versus Avatar. But for now, we're focusing on Book 1 Air. Here's the DVD case, for anyone wondering. And yeah, overall, Book 1 Air, I think, is extremely solid. It's a good book, and I think one thing it really has going for it is that I think all of the episodes are just good. It doesn't have any obvious, this episode is worse than this episode. I think all of the episodes are very, very solid. It maybe lacks overall many really epic episodes, but it just overall works so well as an introduction season to all of these characters. It's very consistent, and I think it makes an excellent start to Korra. I know a lot of people say that it ends up kind of being very standalone compared to the rest of the books, but I feel like it actually links in quite well actually to the other books. Like obviously we know from what Mike and Brian have said that this book would originally was going to be it. There's going to be 12 episodes of Korra. That's it. It's a mini series, and then book 2 came, and then book 3 and 4. But I don't think it works so badly that it really comes across like, oh, this thing is just a 12 episode thing and so on. It's never referenced. This ends up being referenced a decent amount because it's the start of her journey. Amon is referenced a few times as the series goes on as well, and ultimately a lot of the character arcs that the characters have over the course of the run have their origins here. So I really do enjoy Book 1 Air. I feel it maybe gets a little bit unfairly treated in the fandom just because I think people almost overrate book 3 and 4. But we'll get to those when we get to those. We're focused on Book 1 Air now. So first thing I really want to talk about here, I suppose, is just Korra as a character. I think it was such a clever decision to just have her be the complete opposite of Aang in terms of her character. Just that Aang was this fun-loving character who didn't want to be the Avatar and wasn't very aggressive, violent, while Korra really wants to be the Avatar. That's her dream. She's grown up knowing nothing but how to be the Avatar. Is very physically based, not spiritual at all, while Aang was spiritual, and is always kind of up for a fight, improving herself, while Aang was kind of the opposite. It works really well to have a nice contrast in the two series that, that the two main characters are very different, yet they're connected by the fact that they are avatars. And, a big deal was made before the show that we had a female main character. And I know a lot of big media outlets like IGN and stuff like that made a huge deal about it. But I think for the fandom overall, it wasn't that. It was important, yes, but it wasn't mind blowing like the media were kind of making it out to be. Just because this Avatar in general has such a good history of how it handles female characters. There are so many strong and powerful female characters in Avatar that, yes, it's great to have a powerful female character as our kind of lead here, but it kind of, as you get into the show, it's not about kind of girl power or anything like that. It's just she's a really good character who happens to be a girl, and I'm really glad that they went that route with her. And so the big thing you have you have with her is, while Aang was the reluctant Avatar, very inexperienced, Korra's experienced in some ways, but not experienced in others, in that she has the reverse of basically what Aang has. She has the elements that Aang didn't have initially, and she has to learn the one that Aang had at the start. She also has to learn the thing that Aang found easy, but it's hard for her, that being spirituality. Aang kind of caught onto that fairly easily. Korra has struggles with that. So again, the contrast between the two series work out extremely well in that sense, and so that makes a really good character in your second series. And her arc here works so well because they play up the lack of world experience that Korra has, again compared to Aang. Aang travelled the world as an air nomad and so had experience of all of these nations. But this is Korra's first time going into Republic City, her first time doing something as the Avatar. Because a key point in her whole arc over the whole seasons that's presented to us here is that she was fairly secluded in the compound in the south, trained. Everyone was brought to her instead of her travelling around the world. This is later expanded upon in book 2 and 3, but fundamentally that's what you have, that as powerful as she is physically as a bender, as we see in the early first two scenes of the whole show, even as like a little girl, she could bend the three elements pretty well for like having assumed little to no training. And then obviously when we cut to the first scene of her at 17 years old, she completely demolishes her sparring partners in the firebending test. You really see how powerful she is, but that she's also not spiritual, and also more importantly, I suppose, that she doesn't have much world experience. So when she arrives in Republic City, we as the audience experience the city as at the exact same time that Korra experiences it, and you see that she doesn't really know a lot. That all she knows, she's known her whole life, is bending, and how awesome it is, and how important it is that she as the Avatar learns bending. Yet she encounters, one of the first things she encounters is obviously the equalist movement, not a Mon, just the guy on the street, and she kind of shows a little bit of ignorance at the start, that she thinks that bending is everything and it's cool, and kind of can't understand that non-benders feel that benders are kind of always above them in the world. And so that's where the theme of the book comes into play, that being that the villain deals with the idea of equality between benders and non-benders with Amon, and that's really cool. You also see, early on the stuff that because she was so secluded, it meant she was looked after her whole life, even if maybe she didn't have the most freedom in the world. And so encountering Mako and Bolin, who have struggled all of their lives, is a big contrast for her because she's not used to that. And just the fact that she's a character who basically finds her first few friends in these early episodes. Like Mako and Bolin are her first friends that she gets, apart from like Naga, who's her best friend. Asami, Mako, Bolin are the first three characters of her own age that she really seems to encounter. We assume obviously she's met her cousins before and stuff like that, but for the most part, in terms of other friends, these are the first ones that she's had, and that's interesting in itself, just that she's experienced all of this stuff at the same time. And that comes into play with the romance. This is clearly the first time she's ever had these kind of romance situations as well, and maybe that's why they don't go so well, because she's so inexperienced. And you just see that throughout the whole book, that she constantly is learning from everything that she does, and that works really well, because again, the contrast between Aang and Korra, Aang was very kind of well travelled and kind of knew a lot of stuff anyway. Korra doesn't. But so yeah, her arc ends up being really, really interesting as she becomes wiser as the Avatar. She gradually learns airbending and just learns to be less abrasive, I suppose, with her personality. Like that really cool scene that's very character defining early on when she takes on the triple threat triads is really shows what her character is, but also shows a little bit of the flaw in her character. In that, yes, she needed to take them on, but she was more in that fight about proving herself, and so went overboard and kind of wrecked the place in the middle of the fight. But yeah, that's Korra. So let's, I suppose, get into Amon and that whole plot, Tarlok involved. Early on, it seems like just Amon is the villain, and it's very simple. They're going to deal with equality, and Korra and Amon are going to fight throughout the series. But it becomes much more complex than that when Tarlok comes into play, and he is basically Amon for benders. He kind of doesn't have any time for non-benders, and so he's the opposite. And it ends up, the way they're all connected through Yakone, and how Tarlok and Amon, whose actual name is Noatok, are both of Yakone's sons, and how he trained them in waterbending to fulfill his revenge on basically the city, on Aang, for what happened in the flashback that we get in the book. and they both didn't want to do this and kind of ran away. Eventually, the family fell apart, but inevitably, they fell into doing exactly what they never wanted to do in the first place. They ended up taking that revenge, even though they kind of didn't want to. It just happened. Uh, with Amon, obviously, through what he experiences, thinking that bending kind of ruined his family and so wants to eliminate it all. But of course, coming from a kind of hypocritical point of view, being a bender and using bending, a special bending power he has to make it come across like he's taking bending away from others. And obviously, his ideals being taken too far when he, rather than actually trying to have equality between the two, just tries to eliminate benders from the world. So non-benders will just be there and they'll be equal. But that won't be true because he's still a bender in the first place. So really cool ideas explored, and that whole villain plot is amazing when you actually look back on it. The way the backstory plays into it perfectly, how Tarlok and Amon are connected, how it all links into a past experience from Aang's life. It's really well written. The villain plot in this book. Yes, the actual ending maybe isn't the most dramatic compared to some of the other villains that we've had in terms of a final fight, but it works well just because Amon is set up throughout the whole book as just no one can touch him. No one has gotten like a hit in on him the whole book, and then towards the end, he's got so much going on that he can't control everything, and it starts to fall apart. And ultimately, his defeat comes with just him being forced to show he's a bender in front of his followers, and that's how he's defeated by Korra eventually getting airbending, and all this sort of stuff. So I think the villain plot is really good, this book. It just works so well. Korra's plot with both Tarlok and Amon, how through experiencing Amon she kind of begins to, I suppose, learn just about the kind of inequality and stuff like that. That was something she herself was in some ways responsible for a little bit. That she was exerting her dominance over non-benders by using her bending powers that they didn't have. But I suppose it really made her like appreciate the fact that she had friends who weren't benders as well, like Asami is on Team Avatar, and stuff like that. So that was important, what Korra experienced with Amon. And then her issues with Tarlok are actually really well done as well, because initially, it seems like he's clearly out for more power in the city to up his profile in the city, but he seems to honestly kind of want to defend the city against the Equalists. But in the end, he kind of gets so heavy-handed with it that he, rather than actually trying to deal with the issue, like negotiate, I suppose, with the Equalists and try and get some more equality, actually he goes full on kind of take out all of the Equalists, take out all non-benders, blame all non-benders for the actions of a few, and how Korra gradually begins to realise that, and then it all comes to a head, and obviously K108, When Extremes Meet, which excellent episode, probably my favourite of all of book one. It's just a really strong episode where you see their rivalry and arguments, and then it all comes to a head in that big fight at the end, which is still probably remains one of the most violent bending fights that we have seen in the entire show. Just the amount of emotion and crazy bending moves involved. Like Korra gets cut by his ice daggers, she's destroying walls and balconies all over the place, and is about to like burn his face off at the end until he reveals he can bloodbend. And then, like, I haven't even mentioned bloodbending really, but a big bloodbending plot in the arc, amazing. Just it all comes together so well with the idea that this family has like a special ability, and it is psychic bloodbending effectively, and it's just a really cool idea because it presents this idea that there are just kind of special benders out there. There are like special bloodlines in the Avatar world where bending is even more powerful. We get that with the combustion bending and lava bending and stuff like that as well. So that's really kind of cool to see. Just how that bloodbending plot was so important to the book and added so much complexity to the story. So I really like that. And then I suppose with some of the other characters, Mako, Bolin, and Asami don't get the biggest character arcs in this book, But at least with Asami, like it's her arcs really only apply to book 1 and 4, and they all revolve around her father. But I really actually like it because obviously the initial plan was for her to kind of be a villain, at least early on, but then they quickly shifted it and had her side against her father and join the team, which ends up being, I think, a really important concept in the book and a really, really strong moment for Asami. Probably one of the strongest moments for her in the entire series, that moment when she decides to side with her friends against her father, even though her father is the only family member she has left. Um, it just really shows that as much as I'd say Asami also kind of has she shows in this book that she has experienced some of the benders kind of exerting their dominance over non-benders. When she's kind of defending her father early on, she kind of shows that she has similar ideals. But once she finds out what her father is doing and who he works for, she realizes that my friends, even though they're benders, are better than siding with you, even though you're my father, because what you're doing is just completely wrong. She puts her kind of ideals, her friends, over her father because of his ideals. And it's a really strong moment because it is her siding with all of these benders against her father. And the way this kind of comes to an end towards the end of the season, again, super powerful just with how Hiroshi feels for Asami. You see a few scenes that he's kind of saddened that he joined the other side, and then he's fighting against her in the finale. And it's really emotional because they're both in the kind of mecha tanks. They're both fighting each other, and he is about to kill her because she doesn't agree with him. This guy who effectively joined the equalist movement because of his emotions over the death of Yasuko, who's obviously the name. We got the name of Asami's mother very recently. Because of the death of Asami's mother, you see him try to kill the only remaining member of his family because of that, and so you see how far gone he is in his ideals, and just the fact that Asami is then saved by one of her friends, who she betrayed Hiroshi to join. It's a really strong character arc in the book. Bolin's arc is a lot more subtle than most of the books. He has clearer arcs in book 2, 3, and 4, but in this one, it's primarily just that he's a bit of a, not, I wouldn't say quite a coward, but he's not used to these hero situations. He is basically one of the heroes of the book because he is on Team Avatar. But we see in episode 3, the revelation, that he's petrified of Amon on stage. He doesn't even attempt to fight back when everyone else did. He's relying kind of on Mako and Korra to save him early on. And so just him developing from that character who's afraid to almost act in these kind of hard situations, he develops into a character who is willing to run in and save Asami at the end, even if the odds are against him. And that's an important arc for him, because even though it's small and subtle, it's important going into the next 3 books, because obviously his book 2 would become a mover star and then saving the president and stuff like that going forward. All depends on him having this level of kind of bravery, confidence, and not a reliance on Mako and Korra. Especially Mako, his brother, who's obviously protective of him. So that's important. Mako, on the other hand, probably like one of the more the book where he does the most and probably has the most interesting arc, obviously, because he's introduced as probably the member of Team Avatar who's probably the least likable, just because of the way he kind of dismisses Korra early on. But once they all realize she's the Avatar and they kind of get to know each other a bit, he also becomes the main love interest and is involved in a lot of the romance, which by the end of the series ultimately is the biggest problem with the writing of his character. But here you really see you do see a lot of the positive traits for him, in that he is really loyal to his friends, especially Bolin, and you really see that relationship a lot in this book, and that even though the two of them have issues over the whole romance plot with Korra and Asami, they make up over it, that this isn't worth breaking this brotherly bond over. You see how selfless he is, I think, which I think is a mistake they made in book 3 with the Remembrances episode. They tried to make it out like Mako is kind of selfish. Like that's his kind of key flaw throughout the whole book, is that he's selfish, and that Korra helped him to be selfless. When I'd actually more say it's the other way around. I'd say Mako almost teaches Korra to be selfless, because in the finale he puts himself ahead of Korra to save her, and that kind of inspires her. Her wanting to save him inspires her to use her airbending for the first time and kind of show her what it is to really kind of save someone and care about someone and put them first, which is obviously an important part of her learning airbending. So I'm not really sure that they really messed up Mako's arc throughout the book, I think, as I'll explore in the next 4 videos. But I quite like just his involvement in the book. He shows himself to be one of the more intelligent members of Team Avatar, while Asami is more of the tech person. He's the kind of plan idea guy, and interesting role. He really shows how powerful of a bender he is and how good of a leader he is at most times. So really important stuff there overall. And there's obviously other characters like Tenzin and Lin, I suppose, are the other main ones. And Tenzin, just as Aang's son, is a really strong kind of mentor character in the series, and you get to meet his family, and they're really interesting characters, even though we don't get a lot on them this book. Jinora thankfully comes more into play in book 2 and onwards, and Iki and Milo, over the course of the series, I suppose, get enough screen time to really show who they are as characters, so that's fine. But yeah, Tenzin is interesting. Doesn't have the biggest arc, I suppose, in the book. It's primarily about how, even though he's Korra's airbending teacher, she also teaches him a lot. That she teaches him that he still has a lot to learn with the whole... He's trying to be too traditional to teach Korra, who's more of a modern person, teach her all this traditional stuff, when in reality he should be using modern methods to help her learn these traditional techniques, which he eventually learns. Like, he learns not to just dismiss stuff like pro bending because it's not based in airbending and stuff like that. So that's important, and just overall really grows to see how mature Korra has become over the course of the book. And then he has a lot of involvement just with his family, trying to save them because they're targeted by Amon later on, and his Rohan's born. He has an important role in the book. Lin Beifong starts out just like impossible to like, just like, okay, she's just being super mean to Korra for very little reason, and then in the space of like an episode, basically an episode or two, transitions into being a fan favorite. Just with her helping Korra fight on the roof in episode 6, and then her big sacrifice in episode 10, she just becomes a character who really had some strong moments in the book, and ends up, not having the biggest kind of maybe run of form in the book, but she has enough going on that she's a really important character in the series, so definitely Lin, strong character. But yeah, I suppose I'll just briefly talk about some of the episodes that I think are important. Episode 5, I think, will be actually the first one I mention. A lot of people widely consider this as a bad episode because it's where most of the romance happens. But at the same time, one of the biggest complaints about Korra Book 1 is the way they do the romance, and how that there's way too much romance in the book. But in reality, most of the romance takes place in this episode, episode 5. And at the same time as most of the problems happen in this episode, it's also resolved in this episode as well, effectively. Like, before this episode, the worst you have is that, I think, the episode prior, Mako starts to date Asami. Korra's a little bit upset at this, that she didn't make her move before Mako started dating Asami. And then this episode presents the problem in that Korra admits how she feels to Mako. Mako doesn't say anything. Eventually, she kisses him, and Bolin sees it, and there's drama in the team. But what I like about the episode is that it does it so well, incorporating the romance issues into the team's progress through the championship in pro bending, that the dynamic between the three characters as the romance comes more and more into play, more and more starts to affect them in the pro bending arena. And I really like that. That at first it's kind of just Mako and kind of Korra angry at each other, and they're affecting the team. But Bolin has a really good uh, match that time around because he thought he had a great date with Korra. And then the whole team is angry at each other after the whole kiss incident, and they're just not working well together at all. And then Korra teaches the brothers that, despite all of this, you have to kind of put this ahead of that we can deal with these issues in time. We're friends, we can deal with that, but we have to focus on doing this, not romance dramas. And she kind of just teaches them to have hope and still believe that they can progress in the tournament, and the brothers heal their relationship because of that. So by the end of episode 5, you basically have it that the three of them agree that the issues between them aren't really hard or anything like that, and that they're going, once the tournament's over, they're going to deal with it. And then what happens is just that, Korra gets kidnapped. Mako really begins to see how much he cares about Korra. He then breaks up with Asami and gets together with Korra. Like, a lot of people, I don't really see, really retroactively looking back on it, like nearly 3 years on now, I don't really have much of a problem with the romance in book 1. It's not really that problematic. Like, they even mentioned it in the show that the Mako and Asami breakup wasn't very clear in like remembrances and stuff like that, but it was blatantly obvious that was a breakup and that Mako then got together with Korra. It made sense to me. Like, a lot of people, I don't really understand why so many people are blaming Mako so much for this. In that, the whole thing with Mako in terms of the romance is that he maybe isn't the most honest with the two girls throughout, but I don't think he like keeps stuff from them and like really lies and is like actively doing anything. He's just trying not to hurt any of them, but in not telling them a few things ends up kind of hurting them even more. So by the end, he actually becomes honest, and they have the mutual breakup with Mako and Asami, and he admits how he feels to Korra, and they get together. And overall, it works out fine. Like, 5 is the most romance-focused episode, and then there's just a few scenes here and there. I don't really think it's a problem in the book. And I definitely urge anyone who really has a problem with the romance to actually rewatch book 1 and really just see that it's not a really massive part of the book at all, and even what's there is not that badly done. Now, we'll get into the romance in book 2, which is a problem, in the next video, but let's continue on with this. I think the Revelation is a really important episode, episode 3. I really like that episode. Even though there's not a massive amount of action, it's an important episode because you really see Mako and Korra's friendship develop and the romance start to develop in the episode. It's a really nice episode just because Bolin obviously gets captured. Korra tries to help Mako and kind of get that first connection with him because he's kind of he still hasn't like opened up to her, I suppose, a bit, and she learns about what happened to their family, why they're out in why their living situation is as it is, and stuff like that. And they gradually come together, and they kind of see the good in each other. And by the end of the episode, they're basically almost ready to start dating. But then, obviously, at the start of episode 4, Asami literally runs into Mako, and they start their relationship. And that's ultimately the problem with what happens with the romance is that naturally you can sort of see where the Mako Korra romance is going to start based on episode 3, but because out of nowhere Asami just kind of runs into Mako and asks him out, because nothing has happened with Korra yet, he accepts that, and then Korra's left in that situation, and ultimately, Mako gets blamed for a lot of the problems, but Korra is actually responsible for like all of the romance problems really in this book. Yes, Mako obviously like has the whole kind of eventually becoming honest and open with his feelings thing, but Korra kind of creates most of the problems in the book with that. So yeah, I really like episode 3. Just that rally at the end is really, really great scenes. As I said, episode 8 I really like. Episode 10 is like super action packed, has so many emotional moments. The Air Kids fighting for the first time is a really strong fighting moment, getting to see all their skills, Lynn's sacrifice at the end. The way they play that up is so well done. It's portrayed as basically a death scene for Lynn, but it's just her losing her bending and getting captured. But it's so emotional, so powerful with the music. It's so well done. Episode 11, Skeletons in the Closet. Amazing backstory for the villain. I maybe wish there was a little bit more. Like, I would have liked to have seen, after Noah Talk runs off at the end, maybe show a scene or two of him getting the mask. I think that was an important thing to do. Show how it transitioned from him running off, and you know basically that he really has grown to dislike bending because of what it did to his life, what it did to his brother's life, what it did to their family, and so he hates bending. And you really see that ideal and where it starts to come from, his hatred for bending. But I would like to really see where he takes up the mask, where the Amon persona comes from. It's fine without it, like it works, but I would have liked it a little bit extra. And it's something I'm going to mention about nearly all of the villains in Korra, just that if they had that one little bit of extra backstory, they would have been like stunning, like amazing. But still, Amon is more developed than most of the villains in like Avatar: The Last Airbender. And even Tarlok as well, like I think he's almost forgotten as kind of one of the villains because he redeems himself at the end. But wow, the way those two go out, like that was a big moment. Like, say what you will about some of the choices Korra made, like the way they just took out those villains there with the Tarlok, with the chi blocker glove and the gas tank exploding them, was crazy. But it was almost fitting. Like it's a kind of hard one to explain because you're obviously dealing with a big issue like suicide, but just this idea that as much as Amon, you could see that he wanted to create a new life and stuff like that, and Tarlok was kind of like, yes, maybe we'll go ahead with it. He realized that they already did this before. That when they left, they had kind of said to themselves, we're never going to do our father's bidding. But what they just did in the series was do their father's bidding inadvertently. And so, as much as Amon was saying they're going to start again, Tarlok knew that Amon was just going to start another revolution somewhere else again. And so, he felt at that point in time that the only way to end this cycle was to kill them both and bring that sad story to an end. And it's a sad story that ends in a really sad way. And I still to this day can't believe that Nick allowed that. Like yes, there's the whole Korra Sampi thing at the end. I'm just like Nick, wow, Nick allowed that. But this still remains one of those moments where I'm just like, you allowed that? Like, you were okay with that? Mike and Brian showed that to you and you were just like, sure, blow up both villains. Suicide, murder, wow. But yeah, the Skeletons in the Closet, amazing episode. Seeing Tarlok and Amon deal with learning bloodbending, how tough their father was on them. It's really strong. Really, really strong episode. I just kind of look at book one and go like, imagine all of the Red Lotus members had a backstory like that. That would be amazing. Then if I had a problem with one episode, ultimately like episode 12 is probably one of the single-handedly like best and worst episodes of the book, because it has some of the strongest moments, but it also has some of the weakest moments. How the series comes to an end is fine. I like Korra getting her airbending back and how ultimately she doesn't have a massive battle with him to defeat him. It's just she forces him into a situation where he has to waterbend to save his life, and he reveals himself. That's fine. The problem is just that they don't explain like how Aang gives Korra her bending back. They don't like explain what exactly Amon's ability actually did. That's what was needed. They needed some form of an explanation there, just to explain the secret bloodbending technique that allowed Amon to block people's bending, and that Aang is basically energy bending Korra to unlock her chi paths to give her bending back. That's the explanation we've got out of universe with Mike and Brian saying so. But there was an easy way to do that, and just to say that when Korra gets healed by Katara and she can't do anything, have Katara say, that her chi paths are blocked and my healing can't fix them. And that's why I can't do it. His ability blocks your chi paths in a way where I can't just heal them. Uh, and have it basically Aang say that I use energy bending to clear your chi paths, and now I'm going to teach you this ability to unlock the chi paths of everyone else. That's all that was needed, I think, to make the ending really well done. I don't have a problem with Korra just being given her bending back because it fits in the theme of the whole book, all of the books, especially book 1 and 2. In that book 1, Korra has her first connection really with the Avatars, her first moment of the Avatars, past Avatars helping her out. Aang comes and helps her through this tough situation and gives her her bending back. And what she's learned from it is that she has a much greater appreciation for her bending, in that she's experienced life without her bending, and realizes that, you know, it's not the be all end all, but, you know, it's important to her and stuff like that. While in book 2, obviously at the end, she solved the problems without the help of the past Avatars, and that's important. And so that's why book 1 works for me. I don't have a problem with Aang appearing and kind of saving the day, because Korra saves the day without the past Avatars even being there in book 2, and book 3, and book 4. So I'm fine with one of the books having that ending, because at the end of the day, Aang got help from the Lion Turtles to beat Fire Lord Ozai, and it fits that Korra started it off with a kind of similar situation. And it works because Aang learned energy bending from the Lion Turtle. Aang used energy bending to teach Korra energy bending effectively. A different ability of energy bending that I would like to know where exactly Aang learned it from, because they never really addressed, like, okay, Korra has this ability to grant people their bending back, but can she take people's bending away like Aang could, or do you have to directly get that ability from the Lion Turtle, and Aang's ability was something else? There's still some confusion there, but they could have explained it a little bit better. That's really the only problem I have with the ending. I don't agree with people saying that it was really quick and they should have had book 2 be Korra traveling around the world, learning the elements all over again, because my problem with that is that Avatar: The Last Airbender did that. We don't need to focus on a character learning a skill she's already learned. Because it just kind of didn't make any sense. Like, why does she have to go back to the water tribe to learn water bending when she already learned water bending? Because I get the idea, like, the concept seems like that's actually a pretty cool idea, Korra having to relearn the elements, but when you actually think about what actually happens with it, it's just, I already know all the drills and techniques, I just have to connect with the element again. And guess what? The video game deals with that effectively. Just play the core video game if that's a plot that you want. Yeah, there are a lot of things with this book that I think a lot of people tend to over-exaggerate. The romance, I don't think, is a big problem in this book. I thought what was explored in book 1 was actually pretty well done when you actually look back on it. It's pretty much confined to one episode plus another few scenes, and by the end, no one hates each other really. So I don't have much of a problem with the way book 1 does the romance. The problems to me with the romance come in later on in book 2. But other than that, super solid introduction to all of the characters. A great first book of Korra. You know, it's the book that has the least amount of episodes, but it arguably has probably one of the better villains in all of Korra, with Amon and the link to Noatak and Yakone. The way all those villains are connected with that kind of family line is really, really cool. So overall, it works very well. And by the end of the book, Korra knows all 4 of the elements, and she's starting her spiritual journey, which is setting up book 2 spirits. I think book 1 is quite good. As I said before, maybe lacking in some of the really epic episodes that some of the later seasons have, but it's still got some very strong episodes, like episode 8, When Extremes Meet, episode 10, Turning the Tides, episode 11, Skeletons in the Closet, and even I have a lot of appreciation for earlier episodes like 103, The Revelation, and I even like 105. I think 105 is actually a really well written episode, Spirit of Competition. So yeah, that's been the video. I'll be back next week with my Avatar in Review episode 6 for book 2 Spirits. So that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.